Hello and welcome to Newsday Live. Today we're having a conversation on our Newsday investigative series on teacher discipline. And I want to welcome our guests here. This is Investigations Editor Keith Herbert and the reporters who worked on this series. We've got Joie Tyrrell and Jim Baumbach. And with that, let's just jump right in. Keith, let's start with you. Tell us about the project.
Well, this is a first for Newsday, probably for any media outlet on Long Island to take such a comprehensive look at teacher discipline and what the reporters were able to do over years, really, is gather public records about how the system on Long Island, the various school districts, discipline teachers for conduct that would range from physical contact with students to even sexual contact, and exactly how that system plays out, so that the details about what goes into disciplining a teacher that we could get through a public records request. We did a lot of reporting on. They dug up 5,000 records, 200 individual, more than 200 individual public records requests, and it made for great storytelling.
Well, doing that records request, these are challenges that you had to overcome. Were there a lot of them, and how did you do it?
Yeah, 100% there was challenges. I mean, public records request, it's kind of this unknown field for Long Islanders, for people. Our first challenge was figuring out what actually is a public record. There's this whole air of confidentiality with teacher discipline, and really it was an understanding of what is confidential, what can we get. We were learning that from day one up until publishing the story. We're still learning it, and when we hear from readers about this issue, they're asking us that very same question, is what can we get through public records?
Joey, you want to add?
I would have to say even the data that we got from public records, it didn't tell us, in many cases, it didn't tell us a lot. We had some that were detailed, but the great majority, there were names redacted, what happened was redacted, any disciplinary matters that were taken was redacted, so we had no idea in a lot of the cases of what actually happened, and we still have no idea. So just think, if you're a parent, you have no way of knowing if a teacher suddenly disappears from your district or your classroom. You have no way of knowing what happened. And even when you get these records, there's a lot of times where we had no idea what was going on.
Well, of course, you had to supplement the records for compelling storytelling with people. Talk to me about people. How did you get to them? How did you get them to talk?
It's interesting. This started all the way back in 2018. Basically I was in sports, Joey was covering education, and we converged on a story. Essentially, the Sachem football coach was arrested, accused of stealing from his district. And we followed the case, covering news, and we saw that his case, after his arrest, after he was convicted, ended in a settlement agreement. And we both asked this question of is this a one-off situation, or is this a common situation? So we put these Freedom of Information Law requests in to see how many of these occur, and we were inundated with settlement agreements, with disciplinary cases. And you bring up a great question, Joy, in that we kind of went backwards. Normally you have the people come to you, and then you go find the stories. Here we found the records first, then we had to go find the people, and obviously, as Joey mentioned, they were all redacted. So it's shoe leather reporting. It's going out there and finding, matching up stories with what we're hearing with people we know.
And Joey, when you talk about people, of course, you reached out to the teachers and you reached out to the superintendents. You also reached out to some of the students who were involved in that. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I don't think we really reached out to a lot of the students because, again, in the records, a lot of the students were not identified and the families were not identified. So we had to go to advocates such as Laura Ahern.
So she's the founder of the Crime Victims Center and executive director there, and she's involved with what's happening in Babylon, Babylon School District. Basically to bring the story back even further. So in 2018, we go into this. We had a story pretty close to being published around February 2020, and then obviously in March of 2020, the world changes a little bit. And I think we all jumped into covering COVID, and Joey and I used to talk about how in March and April and May and June, oh, that teacher discipline story, that would have been a good story. It felt like it was never going to happen. And then in November of 2021, an incredible amount of brave women at Babylon School District came forward and had this contentious board meeting where they accused about a dozen current and former school district teachers of abuse, including sexual abuse. And it was eye-opening, it was alarming, it was incredibly moving. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this is happening. My second thought was, this system has perhaps allowed for this to occur. This gives us the opening to go back and look at this. Right. And that's where we ended up, and Laura Ahern got involved with the Babylon School District, and that's how we reached out to her.
Right. So the adults were the ones that broke the case open for you, as it were, helped with the reporting.
Right.
Your reporting showed up an awful lot of things that I personally found surprising and troubling. Is there anything that you found, patterns, or anything that you found more surprising or most surprising? Keith, let's come back to you.
Well, two themes that Jim and Joey have hit on, I think, really resonated with me. And number one was the magnitude of just the volume of reports that they were able to get through the public records request. So there was a name and a teacher and a student attached to each one of those. We didn't know who the teacher was because many times the records were redacted, but just the size and scope of this. The other thing is that Joey mentioned the secrecy aspect of this, is that there was a version of what we know as teacher discipline that was turned in earlier before the story was published. And, I personally drove Jim crazy because, secrecy is a big part of it, but we thought it was more than just secrecy, and it was trying to find the individuals that would do some storytelling with us and telling us what their experience was. One young lady featured in the story Jim got through just hard work and determination. And I think that did a lot to carry the story along after you heard her story. And then you could connect the details and the facts that went along with all their great reporting.
So there's a lot of shoe leather involved in this thing too.
I would say there was a lot of shoe leather, but there also was the backing of Newsday's legal department and our attorney, and as a parent thinking that we have these resources. Parents don't. They can't have an attorney send a letter or take a district to court to get an agreement or to get a FOIL overturned. And so we were lucky that we had the backing of Newsday and we had a legal department that would fight for us. But as a parent, why are we fighting for this? Shouldn't we know what's going on in our kids' classroom? Shouldn't we be able to know that? And that I found was a big takeaway from this.
Well, let's keep building on that. What has been the feedback you've gotten from parents?
I think the best way to put it is that we've been inundated with emails from parents in districts across Long Island who are saying, this teacher was pulled out of the classroom in January, can you look into this? This teacher was pulled out of the classroom, and we don't know anything. And that's been the common theme, is that, one thing we've heard a lot of from certain teachers is that there's 35,000 teachers and we have 100 or so that resigned as part of this. That is a minuscule number, and obviously that's true, and that's a great thing that 99 point whatever percent of the teachers are incredible teachers, but we shouldn't accept that point whatever percent are bad, and or troubling or troublesome. So basically, this the response has just been, look into this, look into this, look into this, and while that's it's great for us, it's also alarming for the system.
Yeah, one of the reasons you live on Long Island is high-performing schools in a safe environment, and any information we can bring to our readers that sheds light on the school in detail, we feel like we're doing a service, and this story really resonated with them.
Oh, and also the school district is the biggest portion of the property tax
Your
bill,
tax bill.
of the property tax bill as well. You turned up instances where teachers ended up going from school districts to other school districts. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I think the biggest, one of the biggest surprises for me, and Keith mentioned the word secrecy, and we've gone back and forth with the word secrecy, but the bottom line is there is a system in place through the state to deal with discipline, and most schools go around it. They cut a settlement agreement. Essentially, it's as simple as someone's accused of this, school district says we're going to charge you under the state system, and then they negotiate discipline on the side, and then the system's over, and then the situation's over. But the problem is they negotiate discipline, they put it in a settlement agreement, they don't put anything in there about what happened, or it's redacted, and then especially if it leads to the educator's resignation, the public doesn't know, the next prospective employer doesn't know. It protects the reputation essentially of this teacher who was alleged to have done something quite egregious. That system, that end around of that system allows for someone to go get another job, whether it be in a school district or wherever else, without full knowledge of what they did that led to their resignation from the previous school district.
What chances does anybody have in kind of getting these records? If I wanted to go to my school district and say, hey, this teacher disappeared, I would like to finish the sentence as best you can.
Well, it will take some time. First of all, when they have these meetings and when they do approve, when a board does approve a settlement agreement, they usually don't name the educator or the department. It's usually an employee number. So we looked in board minutes, which is really kind of boring. They're on school websites, and we just looked for the word settlement agreement or stipulation of settlement. And when we found stipulation of settlement, then we would FOIL for that. And sometimes it would come back with a name or a number. Sometimes it wouldn't be a teacher. Sometimes it was a security guard or some other employee that we were not focused on. So we did that, so then you'd have to match it up to that number of when the board approved it. And I think in the video we have a board approving the resignation of a teacher in Comac, and you see it's over in like 30 seconds and the teacher's name is not mentioned, and we only knew it because we had FOILed for that teacher's agreement, and we knew that was coming before the board that day.
And
so
the video you're talking about is attached to the stories
Yes.
On newsday.com.
And Joy, I want to add up something on that. Sorry to cut you
Okay.
off, Joey. We have so many of these records and they're always settlement agreement with between the Lynbrook School District and making a random school district here and employee 121212. We have so many of them that in some cases we were able to match up and find, oh, that 121212 had an agreement 3 years ago. Like we were able to
Right.
match up their employee numbers. And one thing you mentioned earlier. About finish this sentence. Someone has their teacher left the classroom, and you want to find out why. The first thing everyone always does is they go to the board meeting. They go to the board meeting and say, "How come Mr. Smith is not in my classroom anymore?" Well, the board is going to say, "I'm sorry, we can't comment. That's a personnel decision." And then their only recourse is to submit that public records request. Most people, I would gather, most people don't even know how to do that. And then if you do submit that request, oftentimes it's going to come back in the most redacted way possible. Joey mentioned about the help of our Newsday legal team. Our initial records we got back in 2018, 2019, they redacted the names of the teachers, and it took our legal department to recognize that, no, actually our agreement between a school district or any public municipality and any person is public record, so not only can you get the agreement, but you can also get the name. Initially, they were trying to redact those names. So I firmly believe that the person in public is going to get that same challenge, and like you said, they're not going to have that person behind them fighting for them.
Well, Keith, so does that make these agreements secret or not secret?
Yeah, we had that
So
debate
with
amongst
that-
ourselves over a number of months. We used the phrase quietly resign. So the system, if the teacher is involved in one of these disciplinary processes, they usually end up resigning in a quiet way, which means that they get what Jim described as a settlement agreement. The stories that we reported on do show that there is a longer process involving the state, involving a hearing officer, involving a long disciplinary process where the problematic teacher may still be getting paid by the school district. If there is room for reform, I would think shortening the amount of time that the disciplinary process takes would allow discipline to be dealt out more quickly. It would allow school districts to spend less money, and any type of legislation that enumerated which offenses or alleged offenses a teacher would go through the state process and would go through this quicker process, I think would help. It would help parents and probably help school administrators who don't have to deal with this drawing out disciplinary system.
Well, how aggressive is the state in this? Does the state, for example, keep records or numbers or keep count of how many disciplines there are, how many teachers got agreements? Does the state have any kind of data which would give us an idea?
Jim is an expert on that. He can tell you about it.
The state does have all that data. When pressed, the state says they are incredibly understaffed and it takes them a long time to get to these allegations. So essentially, what we found is that, I have a database that was given to me from the state through public records that shows every single teacher across New York State and action taken on their license. I broke it down to just the Long Island educators. It took about 3 to 4 years from that allegation that making it to the state for the state to take action on it. Now that's kind of misguided, because that's only the cases they took action on. How many others did they have that they didn't take action on? So the idea that they're only going to go, it's going to take them 3 to 4 years, and they say because they're understaffed. I mean that's when you say reform, like, and they admit that they want more funding to get more staffing.
Well, we've been talking about administrative things, right? What about criminal things? Some of these cases, we're getting settlements in matters that parents might expect to have gone to criminal authorities. What do you think, Keith?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to point out about a little more specificity about a particular interaction between a student and a teacher that spells out what would be, the offensive conduct, would clarify things. Right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, it literally has to be a criminal offense that's investigated by law enforcement in order to trigger the state system where everything is public and the outcome of the case. A hearing officer writes a report, the details are in there. But what Jim found and Joey found is that there are a lot of cases that don't meet the criminal standard, and there may be victims who never report this because we know that it does take time for some to report what happened to them, particularly in sexual instances. So we may never know about those because they don't meet the criminal standard, but certainly there should be some way for all parties involved to know exactly what happened, when and where, and what's being done to help the student if they need it.
Is there any requirement, and maybe this comes to you, Jim, that a school district that finds something that may or may not be criminal, because technically the law enforcement people would make that determination, can they get away with not reporting it to law enforcement and deal with it in a settlement?
So they are mandated reporters. All school employees are mandated reporters. If anything of a reasonable suspicion of a crime, they have to report it to their superintendent. Superintendents are mandated reporters to the state and also to law enforcement. Where it gets iffy is that the phrase, reasonable suspicion. And there are rules. There are very few rules about when to use a settlement agreement. There is one rule that you cannot use a settlement agreement in exchange for not reporting it to law enforcement. So that obviously is, I think everybody would agree, is a good thing. But there is a lot of gray area in this whole situation.
Okay, well, speaking of gray area, what about a statute of limitations? Suppose some kid as kids did in Babylon, come up years after the fact. And in that case, I don't know whether there's criminality involved, just to be perfectly clear on that point. But if there's a statute of limitations where this conduct would not be covered criminally, someone comes forward, you still get and the teacher's still active in the district, you can still do a settlement?
Yep. So, I mean, this essentially came up in a situation we got in terms of Brentwood. This victim by the name of Caitlin Davidson came forward to us, and she alleged, basically she watched the Babylon video. She had been holding on to what she called her secret for 8-9 years about a teacher that she says attempted to sexually abuse her in the classroom in the Brentwood School District. And watching the Babylon situation, it caused her to gain the strength to send an anonymous letter to the school district. The school district then does the right thing by law, informs the police, informs the state ed. Police determine that, and they meet with Caitlin, and police determine that this is outside the statute of limitations, that there may have been a crime here. What she alleges may have been a crime, but it's outside the statute of limitations. And the psychologists I spoke to, psychiatrists, they say that that is a common thing for sexual abuse victims, especially of people who are victims of people they know and trusted. They either don't report it or they wait years to report it, and then it's outside the statute of limitations. So in that case, the Brentwood School District does a settlement agreement with the teacher. The teacher, Christopher Amato, does resign as part of that agreement. He did have a lawyer who spoke to us and denied all the allegations. But that said, all of that, how that played out was perfectly within not only the law, but within the system that's set up in New York State.
And the Brentwood superintendent says when they get somebody out of the classroom through a settlement agreement, they call that a win. It's a win. Get them out of the classroom, they're not my problem, that's a win.
Well, which brings us back to, Keith, what challenges are there to this system? Either who's trying to get this thing changed? And what chance do they have of success?
Well, we did a little checking in Albany. We didn't really find any legislation waiting or in line, or any group organized with sort of a hot temper to do immediate reform. What I think might happen is that in addition to our reporting and any follow-ups we do, might focus this attention in a more concentrated way, and it might give some people some space to suggest reforms that we talked about. Maybe when the budget is done and there are other legislative opportunities, there might be some chance for that. But we didn't notice any reforms that were brewing in Albany.
The only reform on this process has been just to the speed of it. And that happened in 2015. Prior to that, these cases would take years, years just to take the disciplinary aspect of it before even getting to the state for the license aspect of it. To whet the viewer's appetite, I would say that we have been reached out. I've heard from at least one lawmaker who wanted to discuss this issue more after the budget's resolved. So we'll see where that goes. Obviously, I think it's spoken in our story, on the video that's attached to the story. Laura Ahern herself says that the biggest obstacle to any kind of reform in this area is the teachers union, because and this a lawmaker, Michael Fitzpatrick, said this to us as well, is that they want the system to be difficult to navigate because it protects jobs. The teachers union, in response, say they're just advocating for the rights of their teachers. But it's still going to be a difficult hurdle to climb in terms of changing a system that right now, no one is arguing about. In large part, I think, because before our story, it was kind of under wraps.
So meanwhile, back at the ranch, I'm a parent. What am I supposed to do?
Well, I think as we pointed out, the great majority of teachers on Long Island are good. The great majority of schools on Long Island are good. People move here for their schools. but as a parent, I guess you should just keep an eye on what's going on. I mean, I wrote recently about a principal that was announced his resignation in Elmont, and there was a protest when he was placed on sabbatical, surprisingly, at the beginning of the school year. And the parents there have made a lot of noise. They've had meetings, they've had protests. So the parents there are making their voices heard. And I'm guessing that's what parents can do. Join your PTA. In Elmont, the head of the PTSA is very vocal. She is at the meetings, she's involved. And when something happens like this, when you see somebody leave, either for reasons of their own, but nothing's explained, you know, it's good to be part of the community and be part of your group that can advocate to find out what's going on.
And just to clarify, in that case, there's no indication that this principal did anything
there's no
wrong.
indication. But again, the leader of that group told me that of the PTSA said, and that's the problem. We're in the dark. We have no idea. So if he's leaving for a good reason, if he's leaving for a bad reason, you know, they're not being told.
Yeah, I think other states handle this differently. New York is a place that we go into detail about how much secrecy or lack of information is in the system. Jim's reporting showed that other states are much more open and transparent about this.
Yeah, no, and Florida, for one, any settlement agreement they will post online. So they actually have a database where you can type in a teacher's name and you can see their settlement agreement. Essentially the settlement agreements that we got, and it's not redacted. It tells you what. Sometimes it'll be vague. It'll say misconduct about allegations of misconduct, but sometimes it'll tell you exactly what it is. And I think there's a sense of fear of that information getting out, and I think we should all be in the name of transparency. If you're going to settle and reach a settlement agreement, we should all see it. And I think to answer your question of what other parents should do, I think also email us. I mean, we're gonna look into it. We're gonna handle it appropriately. We will give everybody their say. I mean, I've gotten to know. I got text messages from parents. I get text messages from teachers too, including teachers who are part of settlement agreements, who I've spoken to about their settlement agreements. So I would say, we're on the side of the truth in this situation.
Well, you guys are going to continue on this course of reporting on teacher discipline, and you should go to newsday.com. You can take a look at the stories that they have written, and you can also keep looking for the stories that are under development right now. In addition to that, if you have missed any portion of this program and you need to watch it from stem to stern, please go to newsdaylive.com. And with that, thank you, and we'll see you again next time.